Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Maggie and I are here again with our little book club. I feel like this is our third round of going through our favorite books that really impacted us on our journeys. And it's been really fun just to kind of swap like what's been powerful for us. I feel books are such an interesting like little tool on the journey because they're reference points, they're really
Mm,
just like portals into what we're kind of tuning into, at least for me. I feel like just carrying a book, like actually the book that I brought today is the Tao Te Ching. Let's see if we can put it in front of there. And I literally have this little like pocket copy that I got and just had carried with me for years. Like literally, sometimes I wouldn't even read it, but I'd just carry it with me wherever I went, and I could feel just it kind of accompanying me. And there's something funny about that, of just like having something that is kind of a guide or a reference point with you as like almost a friend or a teacher. And that's how some books have been for me. So today we're going to dive into the Tao.
do you remember how you came across it as in like when that book became important in your journey?
Yes, yeah, totally. Yeah, I remember actually the first time I came across it was around the time I came across Meister Eckhart. So it's funny that same year, for some reason, I just got into a bunch of these mystics. But the copy that I got of the Tao was the Ursula Le Guin copy, and Ursula Le Guin is like a science fiction.
Science fiction writer.
Yeah, so anyone who knows her will be like, what? Yeah, I think most
What?
people
I was
even
going to
who,
say
yeah,
what?
most people who know her may not know that she has her own translation of the Tao. But it's funny because I actually came across her translation first. Maybe because I just knew I loved her and it looked really cool. Like the copy had like cool, like a really cool format to it. And I was just drawn to it. And I picked a copy up. Um,
That's
if
a
you dive,
shock. I'm seriously like, what? I can't kind of compute what you just said. Wow. You learn
yeah,
something new every day. I love it. Yeah, sorry, please continue. I'm
yeah.
just kind of completely stunned by what I've just heard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I think maybe if you sit with a little, for people who are fans of hers, you're like, you might be like, oh yeah, because Ursula Le Guin has really profound things that she dives into in her books. Like she's not an ordinary author, she's got like a lot that she's saying underneath what her stories tell. So she's got a profound connection to the Tao.
That's
And
incredible.
yeah, and her version's very different. What I realized later, then she has her own personal flair and sort of takes personal liberties in translating. So
Hmm.
it wasn't until I think I started reading it, as a regular thing every morning for a little bit, and then I put it down. And I think it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years later I came into the Tao again. And that time, I think I read this copy, um, and it just resonated so much deeper for me, like this translation. And I did my research. I realized, oh my gosh, like this translation reads very different to me. And that for some reason, this one just felt more just aligned with how I could feel the Tao. And so I did a bunch of research on all the different types of translations. Originally, like this was in Chinese. And so, like, didn't, in order to get the full meaning, in a sense, like, you both have to know the language and you have to know the meaning or the transmission. And to have both is kind of rare, right? Because for someone who's like,
Yeah.
realized the Tao or the way, or we could say self-realization or
Hmm.
whatever it is, and to be a translator is a great, a great combination, but there aren't too
Yeah.
many people in this world. So, but I picked up this copy and I was like, I don't know what it is about this copy, but I just know this is it. This is the one. And I just started reading it all the time and carrying it with me. And it wasn't until later that I realized the actual translator of this one is the husband of Byron Katie.
Are you for real?
Yeah.
What else am I going to?
And
Fun
that was
facts today keep coming, seriously.
totally. And when I found that out, because I was really deep into loving on Byron Katie at that time, I didn't even know. I had no clue that this was her husband, but I was carrying this with me every day and then doing the work, doing Byron Katie's the work and watching her videos like almost daily for a while. And this is
That's
the same
crazy.
period. So it turns out, because once I started reading her books, I found out, oh, she married this guy named Stephen Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
And Stephen Mitchell is a great translator of many of the great epic books. And I actually recommend his other books too, if you want to. He's got that quality to the translation, and he was a Zen practitioner for decades before he met Katie, Byron Katie. And he actually was recommended to help her with one of her books, write
Mm-hmm.
and sort of translate what she was doing. And that's when they fell in love and he asked her to marry him.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty incredible to, yeah, have that combination of
I
someone
also
who,
love Byron Katie, by the way. I'm just
me
gonna
too. I love her so much.
seriously, she's such force. Unbelievable.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
So powerful. Yeah, so clear. Yeah, and to have, yeah, someone who's basically living with one of the most like enlightened beings, yeah, is helpful when you're translating. And I think she actually did help with this translation, or she might have reviewed it for him. Um, and I just, read it for yourself and see. But I feel like this translation really gets to the essence in a way that's, the other translations do as
Mhm.
well, but with the sort of clarity that I can feel, this one is just like packs a punch. So anyway, that's how I came across the Tao, and I feel it was really, I think in some ways, it was a reference point for a time when I felt like we've mentioned before, I was working with a lot of teachers who had a lot of structure and methodology and all these details of all the things to make sure to do, and that's so beautiful and helpful. And I just knew something was so much more simple. That beneath all of that, that there was a simplicity that rung most true to me.
Mhm.
And as you see, like just like the ability for this to be a pocket version, first of all, and then like each page is just so simple, but it's powerful. The simplicity to me felt most true. And I would kind of return to the Tao every step of every stage of my journey whenever I felt like things felt complicated, you know, when things felt like I had to wrestle with a little too much and just come back to the simplicity, come back to what I knew and felt to be true,
Mhm.
even if I didn't know what that was going to mean or how it was going to come into my life, or but just to come back to that base knowing. Um, so yeah, so I kind of feel it's that kind of tool to attune to that innermost truest sense, um, that's beyond the beyond.
Mhm.
And I think I mentioned in our Meister Eckhart conversation that in the Tao, the first page refers to the darkness. And we talked about how the darkness, in terms of the Tao, or whatever you want to call it, the thing beyond words, is
Mhm.
not darkness in like the traditional sense that we think of darkness. Um, it's not necessarily our negative emotions or like our depression, or those are all part of this vaster, or this like all-encompassing everythingness of the darkness
Mm-hmm.
that the Tao and Meister Eckhart and other mystics talk about. But I think I just mentioned that again. I was going to read this first page of the Tao where um, darkness is mentioned as like the first thing that's brought up. So I'll just read this first page, and then we can dive into it a bit. Um, so number one, the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The unnameable is eternally real. Naming is the origin of all particular things. Free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Yet mystery and manifestations arise from the same source. This source is called darkness. Darkness within darkness, the gateway to all understanding. And in that last line, darkness is capitalized, the capital D darkness, which we mentioned in the Meister Eckhart, the
Yeah.
darkness within darkness, which we talked about, like our darkness, like our dark nights of the soul can be the portal to this capital D darkness, right?
Yeah.
So there's a darkness within darkness.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I think I didn't mention, but the Tao means the way. It
Mm-hmm.
means like the way of things. And so you can kind of feel like there's a certain, like a movement. You can kind of tune into the movement of the Tao. Um, but I think that there's this, it's a great like kind of contemplation, like a tool for contemplation, just that passage. Like you could sit with it for a very long time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of paradox in there.
Yeah. Would you say that it's like we talk about the isness when you say the way, just the way things
Hmm.
are, just the kind of
Yeah.
natural flow of things just
Yeah.
as they are? Is that would you say that that's we're talking about the same thing?
Yes. That's how I feel it.
Yeah.
And I think that's how uh, that's how it's sort of transmitted is like it's beyond what we can name, but it also just is everything as it's left to be as it is, you know. And
Mm.
there's a lot in here about the difference between seeing and being with things as they are and that isness versus like the forcing and like, you know, imagining and
Mm-hmm.
especially actually the ideas of what we think are good or kind or so things that we've covered a lot in our conversations.
Yeah.
Um, that there is there's this paradox in which like the isness kind of plays and you can't quite wrestle, you can't pin it down. So much of the whole book is just like negations. It's not this, it's not that. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
until you strip away what you think everything is. And so it can be really antagonizing and like very challenging to maybe existing belief systems, you know, that you might have around like goodness or um and it can also, I think sometimes like I just want to mention, like for this passage, free from desire, you realize the mystery. It can be confusing. Like, what does it really mean? Because I think at first I'd be like, well, I mean, desire is natural, like,
Yeah.
um, but there's a certain, if you go deeper into that, it's not, it's the kind of desire that desires what's other than this, um, that's not able to be with
Mm.
what is, you know? And sometimes what is desire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
it
I can
doesn't,
imagine.
yeah.
I can only imagine how confusing that is like it's probably one of the reasons why, as we also talked about, that I'm so happy that in a way, I'm happy that I was put off by a lot of, as beautiful as this is precisely something that I would not be able to reconcile. You know what I mean? I'd be like, what do you mean? You just said this, and but now you're saying that. So it's like, what is this about? Because the mind just wants this or that. The mind just doesn't want to hold multiple things for whatever reason, especially if they look contradictory. And and we just and it has this, there's this natural kind of inclination of the brain to want to call things something, make sense, figure out, have the ultimate answer, um, have the ultimate understanding, because it's how it translates into this is how it feels safe, you know, to when it finally gets it and finally understands it, it's like, you know, the black and white and everything. And so yeah, this whole thing is dismantling all of that, and that can be um incredibly challenging, like you said, for all the held beliefs that we had about how things should be, how we should be, you know, that's massively challenging.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and that way it's like if you can sit with something like this or like a koan, you know, in Zen Buddhism, they have these are basically a bunch of koans where
Mm,
you can't wrestle it down to something like
yeah.
linear and figure outable.
Figure outable, yeah.
Yeah, it's actually meant to work on you if you let it. It's
Mm,
not something you work out. It's not something
mm,
as you, the individual, finds out this is what it means. It's actually something that works on you, kind of disentangling who you are and deconstructing who you are if you let it. And
yeah.
so there's a certain way that like a book like this kind of requires surrender of some kind to be able to
Mm.
fully allow um, allow that sort of connection to happen.
Uh, I completely get how frightening that can be, you know, because sometimes, depending where we're at, we're not even aware that what we believe in or what we've believed about ourselves or the world or other people our entire lives, we don't even see it as a belief. We see it as fact. You know what I mean? And it becomes like often an intrinsic, our belief about the world becomes almost like an intrinsic part of the identity. So we don't even know that we're identifying with the belief. There's just the belief that doesn't look like belief, it looks like a fact. So when that is being dismantled or questioned, it's only understandable that we feel like we're losing the ground from beneath our feet, because all of a sudden something that looked so solid and so true is now being dismantled, which is why it's one of the reasons why so many people, when they enter into this process by their own will or not, you know, although, yeah. Um, they the one of the reasons why they experience sense of terror is precisely because of, at least that's been my case, you know, that the kind of sense of almost like an existential terror of things that were sort of part of identity my entire life, you know, start to sort of fall apart.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think for everyone, there's a different pace and way that
Yeah.
that unfolds, and it's always like checking in with yourself. Like nothing needs to go faster than you feel comfortable with. You know, it's something like
Yeah,
it, I feel it's almost like there's like a natural way in which each person will go at the pace that, you know, hopefully they're
totally.
meant to be and to not force anything, which is part of what the Tao talks about is like this does not need to be forced either. You know, the knowing of this or the coming
Mm,
into the realization, the reconnecting to what this is, it's just it's always there. So you don't have to, there's no rush. I mean, I think everyone's different. I don't know, there might be some folks that have a very smooth
Yeah,
painless ride, but
totally.
um, yeah, and it feels to me that even, yeah, for folks that are going through maybe really difficult times, if you just tune into the part of you that knows, like that knows, um, that can be the comfort of like, okay, like there's something in me that is knowing of this process, and has a sense of like what I need right now. Whether that is to like take a break from whatever you're doing, like
Hmm.
get help, resources, support, um, and to lean into that sense, can be like all the difference between like the questioning of yourself and like and getting a little spun out in all that's happening. All right, so I think I was gonna read another passage. I think it's just what we were talking about. There's a bunch of passages that kind of talk about how uh what this is isn't what we think it is, basically. And this one actually struck me. I was reading it this morning as something that in particular resonates with where a lot of conversation about think what's going on in the world, like what the idea of, what power, kindness, goodness, all that looks like in today's world. This is really challenging that. So this one is number 38. The master doesn't try to be powerful. Thus, he is truly powerful. The ordinary man keeps reaching for power. Thus, he never has enough. The master does nothing, yet he leaves nothing undone. The ordinary man is always doing things, yet many more are left to be done. The kind man does something, yet something remains undone. The just man does something and leaves many things to be done. The moral man does something, and when no one responds, he rolls up his sleeves and uses force. When the Tao is lost, there is goodness. When goodness is lost, there is morality. When morality is lost, there is ritual. Ritual is the husk of true faith, the beginning of chaos. Now, there's a lot in there.
Do you wanna, would you like to unpack this, Sarah? I'm just gonna retreat.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot in there about, I think again, it's a contemplation. So there's no like answers to get right away. I think sitting in the discomfort of what those lines bring, right? Because it challenges our ideas of what we think goodness is, kindness, power, morality, ritual, especially if you're in a lot of like spiritual practices. I know that I had a very ritualistic spiritual practice too, and I read this and I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean ritual is the husk of true faith? It's quite like offensive if you have a practice. Um,
So what did you
yeah,
come to understand about this bit? Because I bet I know that there
yeah.
are many people who just like love the rituals and love the practices and
Mhm.
love the things, and that's I think it's wonderful. But can you unpack a little bit what that meant for you to question that and in the context of what you just read?
Yeah. Well, I found there was so much wisdom, in particularly the lines of doing nothing and that leaving nothing undone, right? Like there was something so true about that for me. And it wasn't about like just not doing anything, like being lazy, lying on a couch, like, I could feel the transmission of that, that there was something about the not trying, like not the personal doing, right? The surrender of having something else do you, like to be done. And we've talked about this when I talked about my story of like being in a rickshaw in India and feeling like being carried in the flow of things, like being in that sense of being in the flow, or feeling like you're actually like catching the wave of the stream and you're flowing with this like greater sense of flow. Um, that's where, I kind of tuned into that when reading this. It's not so much of a personal uh, I'm not going to do,
Yeah.
but of an impersonal being done, or being the doneness, being that. And so when I think I tuned into the ritual at the husk of true faith, that feels like very related to that of there's a personal ritual that we can do, and there's nothing wrong with that. We all have our personal daily rituals that we do, brush our teeth and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just where like we attach something to that it means something. Um, it means something about how we can control something and make something. Um, for me, that's like, when I tuned into when the Tao is lost, there is goodness. Like that's really challenging. You're like, okay, what does that mean when we lose the way there's goodness? And it speaks to just this polarity we've talked about for several conversations about the opposites of goodness and badness, like
Mm.
positive and negative. When we lose our sense of this deepest sense, um, when we lose our connection to this, to what is, then we start to divide goodness and badness. And we start to live in these like polarities, or this sense of separation of like needing to claim morality. Is like the next step of that. When the goodness is lost, there's morality. We need to like control through morality. And we have to set certain standards to sort of like establish that sense of control. And now, again, like, because we can live in this both and, we know that this world has like a certain amount of
Even
need.
morality has its
Yeah,
shadow side, big time.
yeah, right. And then it also has its place in the world right now,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when we tune into what feels most in flow and most natural and in tune with who we are, there's a lot, most of us can feel like, there's certain rules and regulations that just don't match
Yeah.
with that, right? It's
Yeah.
more about control and trying
Hmm.
um, to make something happen, with that sort of really, uh, yeah, that trying with a lot of effort.
Mm.
And the Tao is really kind of tuning into that effortless place. But again, doesn't mean that like we let go of all effort. So it's a paradox. It's
Yeah.
like just sitting in that, not demonizing ritual or making it bad or saying that there's no place, but tuning into where is that place where we don't need the ritual. Like, where are we living from, or how are we being with what is, where we're just living, and life is just being life, and the rituals that have a sense of like, more of that control or trying to predict something don't necessarily have a place. Where is that, sort of, where can you find that in yourself? And so I think that's how I use this, the Tao, it's not a religion to me. I know that there's Taoism, right? And there's a religion that like I have folks, teachers I've worked with who have gotten like really deep into the religion of Taoism and have very particular practices that like spring forth from books like this.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go that route. You can study this as a religion and have rules and regulations. But to me, that seems very ironic.
Yeah.
Because like for me, this is like the one book where it doesn't have that in it. There's certainly guidance, it's a kind of a guide, but it doesn't have, for me, that sense of rigidity, in the sense that there's a lot of metaphor in here about water, about sort of the flow and receptivity of the
Mm-hmm.
Tao, and feeling into that. Hmm.
Because you said like so many things, and my brain is going, oh, I can't keep up. You and I think, oh, like we both, I think, love just the simplicity and of it all. And I think when I listened to you read, I thought that there's this something behind those words that everybody recognizes when they just kind of allow themselves to just be quiet and just sort of read without trying to even figure out the apparent paradox of what these things say. And I've been asked this a lot, Sarah, like how do you, but people are asking me, how do you explain the doer? Well, who does the doing? How do things get done? And things like that. And I think you know me now enough that I always try to find a way to talk about things in a way that anyone can find themselves in it, even if they're not even interested in awakening. And as I was listening to you, I thought, I think almost everyone can resonate with those moments, even if they were rare. Okay. There may be even one moment in the entire life, okay, like this, where that you would describe as I got out of my own way. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that moment when things may have even been challenging in life in that moment, but there was a flow to how you went about those things. You know what I mean? Or you just had this sense like, oh wow, like this, there was this sense of like effortlessness and flow. And of course, artists like are the first people that come into mind, when it comes to like being in that flow state, but I think that we're in that flow state multiple times. We just kind of we're too busy to sort of notice. But the closest feeling I thought that I think most human beings would kind of resonate with is exactly those moments when we feel like we got out of our own way, and then just life seemed to flow, or things, even though they were not even challenging, things would get done. Like those moments when we have like, why is it that there are days when we have like multiple items on the to-do list and it feels so overwhelming? And then there are days that there's the same busy to-do list and things just flow. We just like tick, 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 there's like, yeah, and that's when I think what happens is those moments is that we're not as much in the mind is not as busy evaluating how we're doing, how we should be doing, how we should be feeling, how anyone else around us should be, all these narratives when they sort of I think that's part of the flow experience, and connecting to that effortlessness that we're talking about. So it really doesn't mean that things are not getting done. I would say even in many ways it's the opposite, that There's such an immersion. It's just that the place from which the action arises is not from a place of doing, but more of from a place of being. And therefore it arises sort of naturally as opposed to like push, you know? And that push always comes from something that always comes with some kind of mental or emotional strive, because it's something that we're trying to do to make ourselves feel secure one way or another. And so it feels like a lot is at stake. And so it feels heavy. And so therefore nothing feels like it's flowing. But when that goes, then, you know, my point is it's a natural state that that is in operation all the time. It's just that it doesn't appear or feel that way all the time, but I think we're all familiar with it, you know, whoever we are, wherever we are in life, you know? I don't know what you think, Sarah.
Yeah, I feel like you said that perfectly. That was, yeah, exactly. That's exactly for me where what the Tao where it brings me or where it brought me over the years is it's not about the words. You know, the words are kind of just like um tuning into that thing that's we are all familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
about any particular book. We all have that sense. We may not feel connected to it often or feel like we can, feel like it's familiar to us in everyday life, but there's a sense of recognition.
Yeah.
And like almost by allowing something that shows us the thing we're already familiar with, or
Mm-hmm.
like helps reveal or like tune into that, um, helps just us remember or recognize what we already know a little bit more often, like,
Yeah.
and realize, oh, that's something that I do know, like that we all know, whether it's like little moments in our day or there's bigger openings that we feel. But what came to me when you were saying that, like, you know, a lot of us, like, we may effort a lot
Mm-hmm.
and try to, like, it's almost like you create an idea of what you think you should be doing or what you need to, where you need to be going in order to create a sense of stability and control and like a sense of predictability out of like a very innocent place of like fear or shame or all these like things that like
Yeah.
we have underneath the surface of those actions, right? And so what came to me is like, instead of like the Tao is like we've talked about like this stream that's flowing naturally. Like if you ride sort of the natural stream, you're going to be taken with very little effort down to wherever naturally you're meant to be delivered. That takes a lot of trust and and release and letting go of a lot of things in order to just trust where it's taking you. It may not have any resemblance to
Mm-hmm.
anything you think of. But if you set a goal, maybe you're trying to cross the stream, swim across the stream. It takes a lot of effort because you're going across the current. You're kind of cutting across the current. You're losing sort of your strength and you're out of breath, but you do know where you're going. I'm going right there. I set my goal. I've got a plan.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. You just feel the effects of it, right? You feel
Mm-hmm.
like you're tired. You're like making a lot of effort. You're losing energy, and there doesn't seem to be any replenishment in that, and I know for me, like just doing that for so many years, like just efforting, and feeling like so much like losing so much energy in the process and not having any sense of like being nourished by the whole thing, right? Like just it felt like
Yeah.
spending all of my energy and not feeling connected to something nourishing or replenishing. Whereas if you imagine, yeah, like just riding that current, it's like almost just the energy of riding the wave energizes. It like kind of carries
Even when
you.
it gets bumpy, even when it gets
Yeah.
bumpy, you know,
Yeah.
there's still but the bumpy stuff is still part of the flow. Like it can still, do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
doesn't have to it doesn't necessarily have to cause friction, but I think you know, I do understand like that word when you just said like these gosh, I mean it's actually unbelievable when we start paying attention every time we think I should be doing this, I shouldn't be doing this, I should, he should, she should, you know, whatever. So that conditioning about around it can be so powerful about how things should be and even how we should operate in like day to day, what we should own by now, what we should have accomplished by now. I mean, I can go on and on and on because believe me, I when I saw that in my own experience, I was actually shocked because I've always perceived myself as this like I had a reputation for like being this free spirit, you know, doing things my own way and doing however I want them and whatever. And that was true. But part of the journey of awakening was actually seeing how much conditioning I had that was based in fear of needing to be someone special and stand out and accomplish something above average, which just seeing that was shocking because I didn't realize how unconscious that was, that striving to be that, and how it then took me to the why behind it, which was to feel emotionally safe because I needed to be loved. I believed that I had to be somebody in order to be loved, you know, stuff like that. So, I mean, that alone, just hearing our own inner, you know, dialogue whenever we feel, oh, I should, you know, I should be doing something now. And really, the only thing that's happening is we're just sitting with a busy mind, you know. And I completely get that. It took me a while to get used to not doing, you know. It took me a while for this brain and this nervous system to get used to not pushing, you know, to live without a plan in many ways as well, you know. So it can be it also can be unsettling, but I think I don't know, I think it was Frank's metaphor, Frank Young's, but I'm not 100% sure when he said it's like the at the end you have this realization that the car you thought you were driving all along was a driveless car. And I think that that's like the difference, not that things are not getting done, it's not that we don't take action, it's just that the drive, that it's there's this sense that not being in charge, but it's just not scary because when you trust in that flow or the way, as you would say, you know, then things just feel lighter and go much more smoothly, which also does not mean lack of obstacles or challenges or anything like that, but yeah, there's just such an intelligence to it that I also think we can all tap into, particularly when we look back in retrospect in our lives and see how the dots that didn't make sense kind of connect, you know, as well. So yeah, I'm going into
Yeah.
ramble.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for some of us, we may be more attuned to this kind of flow or like a beingness. So it's something that you can lean into and get a sense of pretty quickly. And for other folks, it may feel very foreign, you know, like and like this is just
Totally.
what the fuck are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes like I just think about there are times when I was reading this and I really just wanted to flow. Like I just wanted to flow. That's all I wanted. I just wanted to be able to let go. But I wasn't really in a place where I could live that. And I
Totally.
think just acknowledging that, like there's to just be with the desire or the sense, a longing of the wanting that or knowing that that's possible. And also recognizing um, it won't be fully possible until it's possible. Like it's not that like there are points, and I was just like really sitting with this, reading it, and there was just a lot of emotional releases, trauma I was dealing with, things that were like, that was what was happening. That was the flow. That was this. It was all of this, but it didn't feel like that, right?
Yes.
It didn't
Yes.
feel like flow. It didn't feel like resting into what is. It felt like hell, right? So I think just acknowledging that, like, there's a time and place for just the longing and connection to this, and it not being actually the lived experience in reality, and the distance between the two, or the sort of that sense of the pain of that separation between the two is okay, and it's just very much the natural way of things as well. Is
I'm so glad you said that. Because again, it's like it's such a brilliant example of how quickly the mind might have ideas about what that flow means. For
yeah.
example, absence of anything upsetting or absence of anything challenging or whatever. But it's like you said, it's even those, moments that don't feel like flow at all, they are also part of that very capital flow, capital F flow, you know? Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like we talked about in the Meister Eckhart conversation about the darkness. It's not the capital D darkness, this sort of, you
Mm-hmm.
could say, void or mystery, um, includes like the darkness of the dark night, includes the darkness of depression, of struggle, of resistance. And same with, you could say, capital F flow. It doesn't exclude the resistance and the
No,
swimming across the current and all of that.
totally.
It actually includes all of that. Um, and we know that there's a difference in our experience when we are um, feeling that distance between the two. And although it may all be a part of this, what is, we as human beings, we
Yeah,
are suffering more when we're not, um, as embodied in that experience.
that's
And
it. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly, exactly. It's not, yeah. It's not the absence of anything unsettling or uncomfortable. It's just something that holds it all in a really, really beautiful way, which is why I call it capital. I keep on adding capital letters to everything just to make a distinction, because there's definitely a sense of flow that I think many of us are familiar with, right? Where just that effortlessness that is kind of like almost visceral, which is like a lovely feeling when we get that. Um, but there's the capital F flow, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's just a nice feeling, it can be very not nice, and yet there is something underneath the not niceness or discomfort that's just unmovable in many ways and movable at the same time. Yeah.
yeah,
Amazing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think we seem to just come into the same, into the same, like kind of holding these, um, that paradox or that seeming contradiction. That's all I feel like, each conversation we're doing it in a different way. But it is really like holding also at the same time that compassion for all the struggle, to really make that known that it's okay. It's fundamentally like okay
Yeah.
to struggle, to suffer. That yeah, that just because the Tao sounds really profound and and feels really like esoteric or whatever. I personally, I think all of these tools, like books, they're only they're here for me to be useful for like whatever, like you need in your life. If you don't find this useful at all for alleviating suffering or coming to a place where you feel more attuned to your own truth, then discard it. Um, I found for me that the Tao actually felt anything but esoteric or any,
Uh-huh.
it didn't feel spiritual. Like it felt to me like the simplest, truest, most basic thing. Not even thing, but like the most basic and truest and deepest. It almost felt like to me, when I would read it, and I felt like it was kind of undoing my busy mind, undoing the things I was creating and
Mm-hmm.
complications and what should I do on my path? Should I do this? Like, do I need to practice that? All that kind of stuff. And letting this book kind of just take off all of the spiritual clothing and just like let that essence be come forward
Mm.
or or tune into that essence. Um, there's a relief, and just the undoing of that and coming into that nothing needs to be done here. Um, and in our world with so much busyness and doingness, I find it quite radical, to just allow yourself that moment. And even if it's that, if you want to grab like a pocket copy, just to have relief in your day, if like nothing
Totally.
else. You're not even like on a spiritual journey, but you just want a little relief of a sense of like, in this moment, I don't need to do anything. Um, I find that that's a great resource to tune into.
No, it is definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And different things work for everyone. So, if anyone feels bad, because like I just know because I see like through the work, I see people that often feel bad that they can't resonate with certain books that are being, talked about or promoted. And I'm saying, whatever, you know what I mean? It's like I think that's one of the things that became a kind of like was like a rule of a thumb. Any book that I wouldn't resonate with straight away, no matter who wrote it, no matter how popular, no matter how many people recommend it, if it didn't resonate with me in that moment, then I would just ditch it. It didn't mean it was a bad book, it didn't mean it was a wrong book or the author wasn't right or like whatever. It just wasn't something that resonated with me. So honestly, if it's a quote from freaking Instagram that gives you a moment of pause and respite and you connect to something through that, or whether this is Meister Eckhart or whoever, the point is what resonates. What makes you go, whoa, there's something in there and I want to hang out with it for a moment, even though I might not exactly even understand what that points to or whatever, like that your our just like if your own heart takes a lead in that, then that's just wonderful as opposed to like what you should be reading or you should be able to understand or get by now and blah blah blah, it's like yeah, just
Yeah.
follow your own heart. And I know it just sounds like such a cliche, but honestly, I actually think that cliches, because they've been repeated so many times, they actually contain so much truth and so much like there's such simplicity in cliche that speaks volumes. But again, there's like tendency for this whole thing about awakening or enlightenment or whatever to just be so complicated that I know that for the fact that some people like just hearing saying like just be with what is, just let things be as they are for a moment. It's like can't be that simple. That's the question. It just
Yeah.
can't be that simple. There's got to be something, I could do, the A, B, and strategy and practice and whatever. And there may be, there absolutely may be. I'm not even denying that. But to me, this has been such an amazing kind of, I've always been led by simplicity. I don't know where that came from, but was whatever I read or listened to anyone, and it was taking me only right up to my head, where I would try to really hard figure out what that means, and it just really sounded complicated and overwhelming and heavy, then I would ditch it. So like simplicity, it was always kind of my kind of guiding something, It's like just longing for simplicity, because I've kind of always felt that what we're seeking, there's simplicity to it, you know, that
Yeah.
is universal, that is not. I just don't. I just know that I think we all sense that. I think we all sense that, and that's, yeah. To me, when something just sounds too complicated, it's out. But it doesn't make it wrong or bad. It's just not for me, in the
For you,
moment.
yes,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we just are all different. And for some folks, like I know there's a whole like community within like the non-dual
Mm-hmm.
community that's all of their techniques are about deconstructing, like deconstructing the self, right? And so it's a very effortful
Mm-hmm.
uh process of like going in and out of the self, like Vipassana techniques
Mm-hmm.
and like using thought through like inquiry and thought to deconstruct ideas of the self and beliefs of the self. That's a sort of very effortful process of undoing the self in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then there's like I feel like where I found myself going was um, a way of just surrendering the self. Right. And so they're the same thing, right? It's the same thing. The self is being either deconstructed or given up or in a sense like you're tuning so much into what's beyond that self that that sense of self starts to disintegrate or just starts to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see that it's the same thing, same process, but one is maybe more effortful
Mm-hmm.
and more um, meticulous and more structured and things like that. And that works for so many people. And then another way may be, and there's many ways in between and all around, but we have a tendency to have like a sense of these two. I think that another way is a bit more receptive, like you're just sort of receiving the transmission, tuning into things like maybe different books or teachers. And even like when I was doing more of like the energy work, which has the word work in it,
Yeah.
the type of energy work that I ended up doing the most was a very surrender-based energy work. So I would just sit and receive the energies that would be working on my energy body. So it's so interesting, right? Because I tried the other types and it didn't feel right to me. And what felt right to me was to literally be so open to have myself be worked upon, just like talked about, like having a book work upon you.
Yeah.
And and I would talk to teachers about how fast, like the deconstruction would happen by being that surrendered,
Mm-hmm.
to really just give myself to
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in a sense, like, depending on how you work, it could go faster either way, or it could go, it's not about fastness, but it's like there's an efficiency to just following your own way.
Yeah.
And it may go against what we're kind of taught how these things work. But you just know what's true for you and you can feel what's true for you. And that's really the most important thing, to know your own truth. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it can be, it goes back to what you said earlier, that this process can be so different. Like it can have different stages as well. Like, for example, when I look back, I can see that the dismantling of this idea of me, of who I was and what I should be doing. It was a process that honestly lasted for years, starting with the first, what I call my first awakening. But I didn't know that this is what was going on. It was, I just felt like, all I knew is that I felt like I was falling apart and I didn't know who I was anymore. And I really struggled with that because I didn't know what to do with it, because I didn't have frame of reference. I didn't have Sarah to talk to, or, whoever's been on this journey to tell me, oh, okay, this is what's going on. Okay. Um, and some kind of guidance. So there's a lot of resistance to that and a lot of fear, but then there came a point where I felt like at some point the resistance was let go, in a sense that, like, I call it the moment when life surrendered me, which was basically my mental breakdown. You know what I mean? It didn't even feel like I decided to surrender to what was unfolding. It was literally like life surrendered me. And there was just a momentum that started. And there was like that. But even then, Sarah, it was like, because I didn't know all these like terms. I've heard them, but I didn't actually know what things meant. I realized that the toughest part of that journey, one of the toughest parts of the journey, was facing my own narcissism and all sorts of other really unpleasant things about myself. And I didn't realize it was like shadow work was doing me. I didn't know that I wasn't consciously doing shadow work. It was just, again, life brought this on me, and it's like it really felt like the shadow work was doing me and exposing things as opposed to the other way around. And I was just going with the process, so to speak. So yeah, it really can have these all sorts of ebbs and flows, but it goes back to that what appears to us, even as bumpy or not bumpy, how it should be, how it shouldn't be, it still is the same perfect unfolding. But by perfect, I don't mean our ideas of perfect. I mean perfect beyond those kinds of assessments. Perfect, that has its own time, its own intelligence, its own whatever, mystery.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone in their own time, in their own way. So
Yeah.
it's not like a capital T the way,
Yeah.
in that, like, the ultimate, we've talked about this. Like, in a
Yeah.
sense, there is an ultimate that we can speak to, but in a sense, there's not, right? And so um, it
Yeah.
feels much more important to just tune into, what feels true to you, to find whatever may feel ultimate to you. Um, but yeah, I think that's, again, yeah, if whatever tools and path, without, without judging yourself or others, is like ultimately going to be most useful. Um, yeah, and it's let us know if the Tao is useful for you, because I'm curious. Like, I feel like the Tao is something I kind of just explored entirely on my own. I didn't really have any communities I connected to who were as obsessed with the Tao as I was. And I think it does feel, because it's a very solitary practice to sit with these passages. It's its own meditation. But I would love to hear from folks if they have any stories about, like, their own insights in the Tao,
Definitely.
or how they tune into the Tao, maybe beyond, the book, and just what they sense the Tao or the way is for them.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have other translations that you feel are more helpful for you, because there's like dozens of translations.
But
So
I know that I have absolutely no idea if this is connected or not, but as far as translations, I was telling you that I love to explore I Ching, just to read
Yeah.
the hexagrams and like what they say. And I actually got to it to such an extent that I had four different translations. And I can totally relate to what you were saying at the start of our conversation. The same hexagram, four different translations, four different feelings. Seriously, from like really dry to, at least in my experience, like the way I found it, that like one translation like really dry, the other one sort of okay, the other one like so deep that I could like literally feel the words sort of in my body. So I think that the translation, like you were saying, someone translating, for example, anything that the Buddha said or whatever, who've had these realizations, as opposed to like just a scholar. Like I'm not judging as one is right, the other is wrong, like none of that. I'm just saying the difference must be astounding, I imagine, in like that felt sense that we were talking about, the words having the capacity to like transmit, I can totally
Yeah.
see how these translations can, one can do that and one won't do that for some reason,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember when I was starting to do a lot more Buddhist meditation, and I think this was more focused on like Vipassana, and I looked at the Chinese character for mindfulness, because I was like, oh, wait a second, mindfulness is the translation of ancient texts, of like, Buddhist texts, Pali, Chinese. Um, so when we look to what the original meaning was, it's interesting
Hmm.
to go back to follow the lineages to see what was the original text and maybe tune into the translation yourself. And for me, when I looked at the Chinese character for mindfulness, I've studied Mandarin, and so I know what the characters kind of look like on a basic sense. I saw the character that they were using was, it has a heart, and it says now, like the character for now, like the present moment,
Hmm. Hmm.
and for heart, like there's a symbol for heart, because the Chinese characters have these pictures within the character. They're symbols for
Hmm.
things. And I remember that was one of those like aha moments that helped me actually feel what mindfulness meant. Because mindfulness didn't feel like, when someone said it, I couldn't feel it. I couldn't register in my body what mindfulness actually felt like.
Yeah.
And, but I could feel in my body what a present heart feels like,
That's
right?
amazing. Yeah.
Right? Like, to be just a present heart feels so embodied for me. Like if you're really present with a friend and you're like connecting in a heart sense,
Hmm.
like we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
And that really does feel like what mindfulness feels like, right? When you're really like in a deep listening state and you're really present and you're really there. And there isn't that like mind chatter that's sort of judging or uh,
Hmm.
trying to like distract from what's actually happening.
See, that
Um,
speaks to me because I don't know
yeah,
much about mindfulness, but whenever I heard the word, it was something dry and very kind of practical and very kind of, again, I'm not saying wrong because it works for many people. But now that you said it, it's like it's just a completely different feel to the same word. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Amazing.
So I encourage folks, if you ever feel that about any text,
Yeah.
and you're a nerd like me, then you follow the follow the translations. That's also why I love etymology, because then you follow the words back to their source. You get to the original meaning and
Mm.
to the original transmission of what was meant to be said, then you can find a deeper truth. It's kind of like this whole thing, just follow the thread.
Yeah. So any
Sorry.
any nerds out there, if you have any fun facts around Dao
Tell
or
us.
anything else
Yeah.
we discussed today, we are very much
Yeah.
welcome in the comments.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sarah, is that it? Do we have anything else for today? Do you have any other passage, or
I
would
think
you
I'll
like to
leave it
finish with
there.
the passage?
Oh, let's see. Yeah, I'll finish with this one. This one's a nice, a simple one. They're all simple, but um, this one is number 24. He who stands on tiptoe doesn't stand firm. He who rushes ahead doesn't go far. He who tries to shine dims his own light. He who defines himself can't know who he really is. He who has power over others can't empower himself. He who clings to his work will create nothing that endures. If you want to accord with the Tao, just do your job, then let go.
Oh, I'm going to definitely listen to that. I'm going to rewind and I'm going to listen to it again because that is definitely my favorite of the ones that you read today.
Yeah, yeah,
Brilliant.
super simple.
Right, guys. So yeah, please comment if anything resonated with you about what we talked about, any fun facts about Dao or anything we talked about today. Welcome, and we're gonna talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.